Here's our control voice as we go to former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel on YouTube. Check it out. We're going to read a good story coming up. Enjoy and relax, and thank you for being here. It's great to have you along, and we're going to build even more good things.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Yeah, all right. Good vibes all the way. I'm in my funky winter outfit here in Moscow, Hampshire. As you know, we like to spread the Russian propaganda. And let's go with a guy who was characterized as a socialist during part of his life. And they tried to blacklist him, but he was so successful with his stories, they couldn't do it. Of course, the man who created Star Wars, Dashiell Hammett. There you go. Thank you. I know all my writing. Okay, maybe not. Let's go to fantastic fiction and again look up a little bit about Dashiell Hammett. I described some of the information about Dashiell Hammett in on Wednesday's Wordsmith Wednesday. We talked a little bit about Dashiell Hammett, and I read the start of a story from him from many, many years ago. But as you can see here, they say at Fantastic Fiction, American novelist and screenwriter, he drew from his experiences as a detective to write The Maltese Falcon and The Thin Man stories. So there you see a series of stories. The big knockover started with The Gatewood Caper in 1923. Wow. Only 80 years after World War I. Incredible, incredible. I know, I got my history all right. And then we have The Scorched Face and Corkscrew, The Gutting of Couffignal, and then down here, The Continental Op, massively popular. And you can see here the big book of The Continental Op, which was edited by, by Richard Lehman. I don't know Julie Rivette, but I actually never met Richard either, but I'm friends with Richard's daughter, Anne, and Kelly, and his wife, Anne. And they're great people. So you can see here, Dashiell Hammett is the father of modern hard-boiled detective stories. His legendary works have been lauded for almost 100 years by fans, and his novel, The Maltese Falcon, was adapted into a classic film starring Humphrey Bogart. One of Dashiell Hammett's most memorable characters, the Continental Op, made his debut in Black Mask magazine on October 1st, 1923, narrating the first of 28 stories and 2 novels that would change forever the face of detective fiction. The Op is a tough, wry, unglamorous gumshoe who has inspired a following that is both global and enduring. He's been published in periodicals, paperback digest, and short story collections. And I wrote up a little bit of background information about him. As I mentioned, he was born in 1894. He died in 1961. And his early life was marked by a lot of diverse experiences, including service in World War I and a stint as a Pinkerton National Detective Agency operative from 1915 to 1922. Now, one of the things that I want to mention is, and you might have heard some of these old-time radio shows, oftentimes detective agencies started with insurance agencies and banks. Before they got involved with cop detection, there were private agencies that offered their services to insurance companies to check out things like insurance fraud and banking, to check up on people to find out if they could recover money, because it was worth the investment. And if they paid these guys, they might recover more. And the better you were, of course, the more your reputation got around, the higher you can demand in a salary. So Hammett's success, as I noted here, he came out of it and used a lot of his detective background to bring up a lot of the real world encounters and tricky things that people had done that he experienced, and he put them into his stories. And as I mentioned on Wednesday, a lot of people think that he had sort of a terse writing style. And as I said, he didn't really have that. And I think a lot of the best writers are misdiagnosed or mischaracterized as being terse. There's a difference between being terse and being efficient. And one of the key things, about over a year ago, I read the opening of Silent Prey by John Sanford, where this character Becker is inside the defense room. And in just basically a paragraph and a line, at the very opening of the book, John Sanford gives you the setting, the character, what the character is like, that he's there for a particular reason, and what's all around him. And he does it by going into the guy's eyes and then showing what the eyes are looking like, and then going back to the eyes and describing the rest of his face. And he ends it with a rhythm that is so great. Boom, boom, boom. Gets you right into the next paragraph. That's efficiency. It's not terseness. It is efficiency and the ability to be able to incorporate, as I mentioned on Wednesday, different modes of writing that were more readily accepted by readers starting in around the 1920s as film and radio came around. Because prior to that, if you were going to experience a story, you were either reading it, seeing it told by a friend, or you were going to a play. And not everybody got to go to the plays. A lot of times they would do certain things, like in the West End, they would do the penny a day thing. Penny Dreadful started up, but they would allow people to go in for an afternoon showing or something like that, right? And as people got more expendable income, they were able to expand and have more theater. But not everybody could go to the theater. But radio and films, that was a different story. Radio became ubiquitous. So to tell a story, you're no longer relying on prose narration to describe something. You're relying on sound effects. And if you put in too much exposition, it becomes boring on radio. If you put in too much exposition on a television show, it becomes boring, right? You're not going to have the chorus up there on stage singing for extended periods of time to give people some setting or something like that. You got to incorporate it well in a theater play, right? So that translated into prose fiction at that time. It opened up and cracked open all sorts of things like the San Andreas Fault, where now you've got film, you've got radio, and you've got ways to express yourself in prose fiction that are becoming more accepted in these other formats, and people start to accept, I can absorb a story in a different way now. I can get it more through characterization, through natural dialogue. I can get it more through actions or showing me something. Repeated actions reinforce something that I might have suspected in the past. Oh, I see it. I get it. And that all comes from being able to split away from a lot of exposition in writing. And of course, prior to radio, they were doing that a little bit here and there. And you could get some of the experimental stuff, like Edgar Allan Poe was very good at that. Edgar Rice Burroughs, maybe a little bit around the time of film and radio coming around. Conan Doyle also similar, as I mentioned. Conan Doyle was able to put in authentic accents from various areas in England. But it really was a breakthrough with the pulps. And one of the big people in the pulps was Dashiell Hammett. And he was just very adroit. He was so skilled with this. So I'm going to read to you a story now on Fiction Friday that is in the Mammoth Book of Pulp Fiction. And this was edited by Maxim Jabakowski. And it came out, what was it, 1996, I believe, I read the other night. Was the copyright on this? 1996, yeah. So I feel like interesting books reviewed, right, Ashley? I'd love to get him on and do like a split screen. That'd be cool. We could both like hold the books and stuff. That'd be great. And then his clock could chime 7. It's typically chiming 7 when it interrupts him. It's usually 7. Sometimes it's like 1 or 2, but it's usually 7. So here's Dashiell Hammett. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 15-page story, but it's fairly small print, so it might take about a half hour to read. We'll see what happens. This is called Too Many Have Lived, and you might recognize the name of the main character here. Let's hope I do an okay job on Fiction Friday. Settle back, spread the word, share the links, and all the Lancelot links as well. Too many have died. And when was this published, by the way? Not when he was 19, like Robert Bloch. Let's see. Or, sorry, Too Many Have Lived. Too Many Have Lived. 1933, same year as King Kong. Too Many Have Lived, to put that up there visually so you can see it, by Dashiell Hammett, 1933. The man's tie was as orange as a sunset. He was a large man, tall and meaty, without softness. The dark hair parted in the middle, flattened to his scalp, his firm, full cheeks, the clothes that fit him with noticeable snugness, even the small pink ears flat against the side of his head. Each of these seemed but a differently colored part of one same smooth surface. His age could have been 35 or 45. He sat beside Samuel Spade's desk, leaning forward a little over his malacca stick, and said, "No, I want you to find out what happened to him. I hope you never find him." His protuberant green eyes stared solemnly at Spade. Spade rocked back in his chair. His face, given a not unpleasantly satanic cast by the V's of his bony chin, mouth, nostrils, and thickish brows, was as politely interested as his voice. "Why?" The green-eyed man spoke quietly, with assurance. "I can talk to you, Spade. You've the sort of reputation I want in a private detective. That's why I'm here." Spade's nod committed him to nothing. The green-eyed man said, "And any fair price is all right with me." Spade nodded as before. "And with me," he said. "But I've got to know what you want to buy. You want to find out what's happened to this Eli Haven, but you don't care what it is?" The green-eyed man lowered his voice, but there was no other change in his mien. "In a way, I do. For instance, if you found him and fixed it so he stayed away for good, it might be worth more money to me." "You mean even if he didn't want to stay away?" The green-eyed man said, "Especially." Spade smiled and shook his head. "Probably not enough more money the way you mean it." He took his long, thick-fingered hands from the arms of his chair and turned them palms up. "Well, what's it all about, Collier?" Collier's face reddened a little, but his eyes maintained their unblinking, cold stare. "This man's got a wife. I like her. They had a row last week, and he blew. So, if I can convince her he's gone for good, there's a chance she'll divorce him." "I'd want to talk to her," Spade said. "Who is this Eli Haven? What does he do?" "He's a bad egg. He doesn't do anything. Writes poetry or something." "And what can you tell me about him that'll help?" "Nothing Julia, his wife, can't tell you. You're going to talk to her." Collier stood up. "I've got connections. Maybe I can get something for you through them later." A small-boned woman of 25 or 6 opened the apartment door. Her powder blue dress was trimmed with silver buttons. She was full-bosomed but slim, with straight shoulders and narrow hips, and she carried herself with a pride that would have been cockiness in one less graceful. Spade said, "Mrs. Haven?" She hesitated before saying, "Yes." "Gene Collier sent me to see you. Name's Spade. I'm a private detective. He wants me to find your husband." "And have you found him?" "I told him I'd have to talk to you first." Her smile went away. She studied his face gravely, feature by feature. Then she said, "Certainly," and stepped back, drawing the door back with her. When they were seated in facing chairs in a cheaply furnished room overlooking a playground where children were noisy, she asked, "Did Gene tell you why he wanted Eli found?" "He said if you knew he was gone for good, maybe you'd listen to reason." She said nothing. "Has he ever gone off like this before?" "Often." "What's he like?" "He's a swell man," she said dispassionately. "When he's sober. And when he's drinking, he's all right except with women and money. That leaves him a lot of room to be all right in. What does he do for a living?" "He's a poet," she replied, "but nobody makes a living at that." "Well?" "Oh, he pops in with a little money now and then, poker, races." "Of course. How long have you been married?" 4 years, almost." She smiled mockingly. "San Francisco all the time?" "No, we lived in Seattle the first year and then came here." "He from Seattle?" She shook her head. "Someplace in Delaware." "What place?" "I don't know." Spade drew his thickish brows together a little. "Where are you from?" She said sweetly, "You're not hunting for me." "Well, you act like it," he grumbled. "Well, all right, who are his friends?" "Don't ask me." He made an impatient grimace. "You know some of them," he insisted. "Well, sure. There's a fellow named Minera and Louis James and somebody he calls Connie." "Who are they?" "Men," she replied blandly. "I don't know anything about them. They phone or drop by to pick him up, or I see him around town with them. That's all I know." "What do they do for a living?" "They can't all write poetry." She laughed. "They could try. One of them, Louis James, is a member of Gene's staff, I think. I honestly don't know any more about them than I've told you." "Think they'd know where your husband is?" She shrugged. "They're kidding me if they do. They still call up once in a while to see if he's turned up. And these women you mentioned. Oh, they're not people I know." Spade scowled thoughtfully at the floor, then asked, What did he do before he started not making a living writing poetry?" "Oh, anything. He sold vacuum cleaners, hoboed, went to sea, dealt blackjack, railroaded, canned houses, worked in lumber camps, at carnivals, worked on a newspaper, anything." "And have any money when he left?" $3 that he borrowed from me when he left." "And what did he say to you?" She laughed. "Said if I used whatever influence I had with God while he was gone, he'd be back at dinner time with a surprise for me." Spade raised his eyebrows. "Were you on good terms?" "Oh, yes. Our last fight had been patched up a couple of days before." "When did he leave?" "A Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock, I guess." "You got any photographs of him?" "Yes." She went to a table by one of the windows, pulled a drawer out, and turned towards Spade again with a photograph in her hand. Spade looked at the picture of a thin face with deep-set eyes, a sensual mouth, and a heavy, lined forehead topped by a disorderly mop of coarse blonde hair. He put Haven's photograph in his pocket and picked up his hat. He turned towards the door and halted. What kind of poet is he? Pretty good? She shrugged. That depends on who you ask. Any of it around here? No, she smiled. Do you think he's hiding between the pages? You never can tell what'll lead to what. Now, I'll be back sometime. Think things over here and see if you can't find some way of loosening up a little more. See you later. He walked down Post Street to Mulford's bookstore and asked for a volume of Haven's poetry. I'm sorry, the girl said. I sold my last copy last week. She smiled. To Mr. Haven himself. I can order it for you. You know, Mr. Haven? Only through selling his books. Spade pursed his lips and asked, What day was it? He gave her one of his business cards. Please, this is important. She went to a desk, turned the pages of a red-bound sales book, and came back to him with the book open in her hand. It was last Wednesday, she said, and he delivered it to Mr. Roger Ferris, 1981 Pacific Avenue. Thanks a lot, Spade said. Outside, he hailed a taxicab and gave the driver Mr. Roger Ferris's address. The Pacific Avenue house was a 4-story graystone set behind a narrow strip of lawn. The room into which a plump-faced maid ushered Spade was large and high-ceilinged. Spade sat down. But when the maid had gone away, he rose and began to walk around the room. He halted at a table where there had been 3 books. One of them had a salmon-colored jacket on it, which was printed in red and had an outline drawn of a bolt of lightning striking the ground between a man and a woman. And on the red, the black words, Colored Light, by Eli Haven. Spade picked up the book and went back to his chair. There was an inscription on the flyleaf, heavy, irregular characters written with blue ink. To good old Buck, who knew his colored lights, in memory of them there days, Eli. Spade turned pages at random and idly read a verse. Statement. Too many have lived as we live, for our lives to be proof of our living. Too many have died as we die, for their deaths to be proof of our dying. He looked up from the book as a man in dinner clothes came into the room. He wasn't a tall man, but his erectness made him seem tall, even when Spade's 6 feet and a fraction of an inch were standing before him. He had bright blue eyes, undimmed by his 50-some years, a sunburned face in which no muscle sagged, a smooth, broad forehead, and thick, short, nearly white hair. There was dignity in his countenance and amiability. He nodded at the book Spade still held. How do you like it? Spade grinned and said, I guess I'm just a mug, and put the book down. That's what I came to see you about, though, Mr. Ferris. You know Eli Haven? Yes, certainly. Sit down, Mr. Spade. He sat in a chair not far from Spade's. I knew him as a kid. He's not in trouble, is he? Spade said, I don't know. I'm trying to find him. Ferris spoke hesitantly. May I ask why? You know Gene Collier? Yes. Ferris hesitated again, then said, This is in confidence. I've a chain of picture houses through Northern California, you know, and a couple of years ago when I had some labor trouble, I was told that Collier was the man to get in touch with to have it straightened out. That's how I happened to meet him. Yes, Spade said dryly. A lot of people happen to meet Gene that way. But what's he got to do with Eli? Wants him found. How long since you've seen him? Last Thursday he was here. What time did he leave? Midnight, a little after. He came over in the afternoon around 3:30. We haven't seen each other for years. I persuaded him to stay for dinner. He looked pretty seedy, and I lent him some money. How much? $150. All I had in the house. See where he was going when he left? Ferris shook his head. He said he'd phone me the next day. Did he phone you the next day? No. And you've known him all his life? Well, not exactly, but he worked for me 15 or 16 years ago when I had a carnival company, Great Eastern and Western combined shows, with a partner for a while and then by myself. And I always liked the kid. How long before Thursday since you'd seen him? Oh, Lord knows, Ferris replied. I'd lost track of him for years. Then Wednesday, out of a clear sky, that book came, with no address or anything, just that stuff written in the front. And the next morning he called me up. Well, I was tickled to death to know he was still alive and doing something with himself. So he came over that afternoon, and we put in about 9 hours straight talking about old times. Tell you much about what he'd been doing since then? Just that he'd been knocking around, doing one thing and another, taking the breaks as they came. He didn't complain much. I had to make him take the 150. Spade stood up. Thanks ever so much, Mr. Ferris. But Ferris interrupted him. Well, not at all. And if there's anything I can do, call on me. Spade looked at his watch. Can I phone my office to see if anything's turned up? Oh, certainly. There's a phone in the next room to the right. Spade said, thanks, and went out. When he returned, he was rolling a cigarette. His face was wooden. Any news? Ferris asked. Yes, Collier's called the job off. He says Haven's body's been found in some bushes on the other side of San Jose. 3 bullets in it. He smiled darkly, adding, he told me he might be able to find out something through his connections. Well, morning sunshine coming through the curtains that screened Spade's office windows put 2 fat yellow rectangles on the floor and gave something to the room a mild yellow tint. He sat at his desk, staring meditatively at a newspaper. He did not look up when Effie Perrin came in from the outer office. She said, Mrs. Haven is here. He raised his head and then said, that's better. Push her in. Mrs. Haven came in quickly. Her face was white, and she was shivering in spite of her fur coat and the warmth of the day. She came straight to Spade and asked, did Jean kill him? Spade said, I don't know. I've got to know, she cried. Spade took her hands. Here, sit down. He led her to a chair and asked, Collier tell you he'd called the job off? She stared at him in amazement. He what? He left word here last night that your husband had been found and he wouldn't need me anymore. She hung her head, and her words were barely audible. Then he did. Spade shrugged. Maybe only an innocent man could have afforded to call it off then, or maybe he was guilty, but had brains enough and nerve enough to make the call. She was not listening to him. She was leaning towards him, speaking earnestly. But, Mr. Spade, you're not going to drop it like that. You're not going to let him stop you. While she was speaking, his telephone bell rang. He said, excuse me, and picked up the receiver. Yes? Uh-huh. So, he pursed his lips. I'll let you know. He pushed the telephone aside slowly and faced Mrs. Haven again. "Collier's outside." "Does he know I'm here?" she asked quickly. "Couldn't say." He stood up, pretending he was not watching her closely. "Do you care?" She pinched her lower lip between her teeth, said, "No," but hesitantly. "Fine, I'll have him in." She raised a hand as if in protest, then let it drop, and her white face became composed. "Whatever you want," she said. Spade opened the door and said, "Hello, Collier. Come on in. We're just talking about you." Collier nodded and came into the office, holding his stick in one hand, his hat in the other. "How are you this morning, Julia? You ought to have phoned me. I'd have driven you back to town." I didn't know what I was doing." Collier looked at her for a moment longer, then shifted the focus of his expressionless green eyes to Spade's face. "Well, have you been able to convince her I didn't do it?" "We hadn't got around to that," Spade said. "I was just trying to find out how much reason there was for suspecting you. Sit down." Collier sat down somewhat carefully and asked, And then you arrived." Collier nodded gravely. "All right, Spade," he said. "You're hired again to prove to Mrs. Haven that I didn't have anything to do with it." "Gene!" she exclaimed in a choked voice and held her hands out toward him appealingly. "I don't think you did. I don't want to think you did, but I'm so afraid." She put her hands to her face and began to cry. Collier went over to the woman. "Take it easy," he said. "We'll kick it out together. We will." Spade went into the outer office, shutting the door behind him. Effie Perrin stopped typing a letter. He grinned at her and said, "Somebody ought to write a book about people sometime. They're peculiar," and went over to the water bottle. "You've got Wally Kellogg's number. Call him up and ask him where I can find Tom Manera." She returned to the inner office. Mrs. Haven had stopped, or he returned to the inner office. Mrs. Haven had stopped crying. She said, "I'm sorry." Spade said, "It's all right." He looked sideways at Collier. "I still got my job?" "Yes," Collier cleared his throat. "But if there's nothing special right now, I'd better take Mrs. Haven home." "Okay, but there's one thing. According to the Chronicle, you identified him. How come you were down there?" "I went down when I heard they'd found a body," Collier replied deliberately. "I told you I had connections. I heard about the body through them." Spade said, "All right, be seeing you," and opened the door for them. When the corridor door closed behind them, Effie Perrin said, "Manera's at the Buxton on Army Street." Spade said, "Thanks." He went into the inner office to get his hat. On his way out, he said, "If I'm not back in a couple of months, tell them to look for my body there." Spade walked down a shabby corridor to a battered green door marked 411. The murmur of voices came through the door, but no words could be distinguished. He stopped listening and knocked. An obviously disguised male voice said, "What is it?" "I want to see Tom. This is Sam Spade." A pause, then, "Tom ain't here." Spade put a hand on the knob and shook the frail door. "Come on, open up," he growled. Presently, the door was opened by a thin, dark man of 25 or 6 who tried to make his beady dark eyes guileless when saying, "I didn't think it was your voice at first." The slackness of his mouth made his chin seem even smaller than it was. His green striped shirt, open at the neck, was not clean. His gray pants were carefully pressed, however. "You got to be careful these days," Spade said solemnly, and went through the doorway into a room where 2 men were trying to seem uninterested in his arrival. One of them leaned against the window-sill, filing his fingernails. The other was tilted back in a chair with his feet on the edge of a table and a newspaper spread between his hands. They glanced at Spade in unison and went on with their occupations. Spade said cheerfully, "Always glad to meet any friends of Tom Manera's." Manera finished shutting the door, and said awkwardly, yes, Mr. Spade, meet Mr. Conrad and Mr. James. Conrad, the man at the window, made a vaguely polite gesture with the nail file in his hand. He was a few years older than Manera, of average height, sturdily built, with a thick-featured, dull-eyed face. James lowered his paper for an instant to look coolly, appraisingly at Spade and said, "How are you, brother?" Then he returned to his reading. He was a sturdily built man, as sturdy as Conrad, but taller, with his face, a face of shrewdness that the others lacked. "Ah," Spade said, "and friends of the late Eli Haven." The man at the window jabbed a finger with his nail file and cursed it bitterly. Manera moistened his lips and then spoke rapidly, with a whining note in his voice. "But on the level, Spade, we hadn't done, any of us, none seen him for a week." Spade seemed mildly amused by the dark man's manner. "What do you think he was killed for?" "All I know is what the papers say. His pockets was all turned inside out, and there wasn't as much as a match on him." He drew down the ends of his mouth. "But as far as I know, he didn't have no dough. He didn't have none Tuesday night." Spade, speaking softly, said, "I hear he got some Thursday night." Manera, behind Spade, caught his breath audibly. James said, "I guess you ought to know." "I don't." "He ever work with you boys?" James slowly put aside his newspaper and took his feet off the table. His interest in Spade's question seemed great enough, but almost impersonal. "Ah, what do you mean by that?" Spade pretended surprise. "But you boys, you must work at something." Manera came round to Spade's side. Listen, Spade," he said. "This guy Haven was just a guy we knew. We didn't have nothing to do with rubbing him out. We don't know nothing about it. You know we..." 3 deliberate knocks sounded at the door. Manera and Conrad looked at James, who nodded. But by then Spade, moving swiftly, had reached the door and was opening it. Roger Ferris was there. Spade blinked at Ferris, Ferris at Spade. Then Ferris put out his hand and said, "I am glad to see you." "Come on in," Spade said. "Look at this, Mr. Spade." Ferris's hand trembled as he took a slightly soiled envelope from his pocket. Ferris's name and address were typewritten on the envelope. There was no postage stamp on it. Spade took out the enclosure, a narrow slip of cheap white paper, and unfolded it. On it was typewritten, "You had better come to room number 411 Buxton Hotel on Army Street at 5 p.m. this afternoon on account of Thursday night." There was no signature. Spade said, "It's a long time before 5 o'clock. "It is," Ferris agreed with him. "I came as soon as I got that. It was Thursday night Eli was at my house." Manera was jostling Spade, asking, "What is all this?" Spade held the note up for the dark man to read. He read it and yelled, "Honest, Spade, I don't know nothing about that letter." "Does anybody?" Spade asked. Conrad said, "No," hastily. James said, "What letter?" Spade looked dreamily at Ferris for a moment, then said, as if speaking to himself, "Of course, Mr. Haven was trying to shake you down." Ferris's face reddened. "What? Shakedown?" Spade repeated patiently. "Money, blackmail." "Look here, Spade," Ferris said earnestly. "You don't really believe what you just said. What would he have to blackmail me on?" "Too good old buck," Spade quoted the dead poet's inscription. "Too good old buck, who knew his colored lights, in memory of them their days." He looked somberly at Ferris from beneath slightly raised brows. "What colored lights?" What's the circus and carnival slang term for kicking a guy off a train while it's going? Red lighting. Sure, that's it, red lights. You be red light Ferris. Sorry, who did you red light, Ferris, that Haven knew about? Who did you red light? Monero went over to a chair, sat down, put his elbow on his knees, his head between his hands, and stared blankly at the floor. Conrad was breathing as if he had been running. Spade addressed Ferris. Well? Ferris wiped his face with a handkerchief, put the handkerchief in his pocket, and said simply, it was a shakedown. And you killed him. Ferris's blue eyes, looking into Spade's yellow-gray ones, were clear and steady, as was his voice. I did not, he said. I swear I did not. Let me tell you what happened. He sent me the book, as I told you, and I knew right away what that joke he wrote in the front meant. So the next day, when he phoned me and said he was coming over to talk over old times and to try to borrow some money for old times' sake, I knew what he meant again. And I went down to the bank and drew out $10,000. You can check that up. It's the Seamen's National Bank. I will, Spade said. As it turned out, I didn't need that much. He wasn't very big time, and I talked him into taking $5,000. I put the other $5,000 back in the bank next day. You can check that up. I will, Spade said. I told him I wasn't going to stand for any more taps. This $5,000 was the first and last. I made him sign a paper saying he had helped in what I'd done. And he signed it. He left sometime around midnight, and that's the last I ever saw of him. Spade tapped the envelope Ferris had been given. And how about this note? A messenger boy brought it at noon, and I came right over here. Eli had assured me he hadn't said anything to anybody, but I didn't know. I had to face it, whatever it was. Spade turned to the others, his face wooden. And? Monera and Conrad looked at James, who made an important grimace and said, Oh, sure. We sent him that letter. Why not? We was friends of Eli's, and we hadn't been able to find him since he went to put the squeeze to this here baby. And then he turns up dead. So we kind of like to have the gent come over and explain things. You knew about the squeeze? Sure. We was all together when he got the idea. How'd he happen to get the idea? Spade asked. James spread the fingers of his left hand. We'd been drinking and talking, you know, the way a bunch of guys will, about all they'd seen and done, and he told a yarn about once seeing a guy boot another off a train into a canyon, and he happens to mention the name of the guy that done the booting, Buck Ferris. And somebody says, what's this Ferris look like? Eli tells him what he looks like then, saying he ain't seen him for 15 years, and whoever it is whistles and says, I bet that's the Ferris that owns about half the movie joints in the state. I bet you he'd give you something to keep that buck trail all covered up. Well, the idea kind of hit Eli. You could see that. He thought a little while, and then he got cagey. He asked what this movie Ferris's first name was, and the other guy tells him Roger. He makes out he's disappointed and says, no, it ain't him. His first name was Martin. We all gave him the ha-ha, and he finally admits he's thinking of seeing the gent. And when he called up Thursday afternoon, around noon, he says he's throwing a party at Pogie Hecker's that night. It ain't no trouble to figure out what's what. What was the name of the gentleman who was red-lighted? He wouldn't say. He shut up tight. You couldn't blame him. Spade agreed. Then nothing. He never showed up at Pogie's. We tried to get him on the phone around 2 o'clock in the morning, but his wife said he hadn't been home. So we stuck around till 4 or 5 and then decided he had given us a runaround and made Pogie charge the bill to him. And then we beat it. I ain't seen him since, dead or alive. Spade said mildly, maybe all this. Sure you didn't find Eli later that morning, take him riding, swap him bullets for Ferris's 5 thou, and dump him in the... A sharp double knock sounded on the door. Spade's face brightened. He went to the door and opened it. A young man came in. He was very dapper and very well proportioned. He wore a light topcoat, and his hands were in his pockets. Just inside the door, he stepped to the right and stood with his back to the wall. By that time, another young man was coming in. He stepped to the left. Though they did not actually look alike, their common dapperness and similar trimness of their bodies and their almost identical positions, backs to the wall, hands in pockets, cold, bright eyes, studying the occupants of the room, gave them for an instant the appearance of twins. Then Gene Collier came in. He nodded at Spade, but paid no attention to the others in the room, though James said, "Hello, Gene." "Anything new?" Collier asked Spade. Spade nodded. "It seems this gentleman," he jerked a thumb at Ferris, "was any place we can talk. There's a kitchen back here." Collier snapped a smear anybody that pops over his shoulder look at the 2 dapper young men and followed Spade into the kitchen. He sat on the one kitchen chair and stared with unblinking green eyes at Spade while Spade told him what he had learned. When the private detective had finished, the green-eyed man asked, "Well, what do you make of it?" Spade looked thoughtfully at the other. "You've picked up something. I'd like to know what that is." Collier said, "They found the gun in a stream, a quarter of a mile from where they found him. It's James's. Got the mark on it when it was shot out of his hand once in Vallejo." "Well, that's nice," Spade said. "Listen, a kid named Thurber says James comes to him last Wednesday and gets him to Tail Haven. Thurber picks him up Thursday afternoon, puts him in at Ferris's, and phones James. James tells him to take a plant on the place and to let him know where Haven goes when he leaves. But some nervous woman in the neighborhood puts in a rumble about the kid hanging around, and the cops chase him about 10 o'clock. Spade pursed his lips and stared thoughtfully at the ceiling. Collier's eyes were expressionless, but sweat made his round face shiny, and his voice was hoarse. "Spade," he said, "I'm going to turn him in." Spade switched his gaze from the ceiling to the protuberant green eyes. "I've never turned in one of my people before," Collier said, "but this one goes. Julia's got to believe I hadn't anything to do with it if it's one of my people and I turn him in. Hasn't she understood at that point?" Spade nodded slowly. "I think so." Collier suddenly averted his eyes and cleared his throat. When he spoke again, it was curtly. "Well, he goes." Minera, James, and Conrad were seated when Spade and Collier came out of the kitchen. Ferris was walking the floor. The 2 dapper young men had not moved. Collier went over to James. "Where's your gun, Louis?" he asked. James moved his right hand a few inches towards his left breast, stopped it, and said, "Oh, I didn't bring it." With his gloved hand open, Collier struck James on the side of the face, knocking him out of his chair. James straightened up, mumbling, "I didn't mean nothing." He put a hand to the side of his face. "I know I oughtn't have done it, Chief, but when he called up and said he didn't like to go up against Ferris without something and didn't have any of his own, I said, 'All right,' and sent it over to him." Collier said, "And you sent Thurber over to him too?" We were just kind of interested in seeing if he did go through with it, James mumbled. And you couldn't have gone there yourself or sent somebody else? After Thurber had stirred up the whole neighborhood? Collier turned to Spade. Want us to help you take them in? Or want to call the wagon? We'll do it regular, Spade said, and went to the wall phone. When he turned away from it, his face was wooden, his eyes dreamy. He made a cigarette, and he lit it, and said to Collier, I'm silly enough to think your Louis has got a lot of right answers in that story of his. James took his hand down from his bruised cheek and stared, astonished eyes. Collier growled, What's the matter with you? Nothing, Spade said softly, except I think you're a little too anxious to slam it on him. He blew smoke out. Why, for instance, should he drop his gun there when it had marks on it that people knew? Collier said, You think he's got brains? If these boys killed him, knew he was dead, why do they wait till the body's found and things are stirred up before they go after Ferris again? What did they turn his pockets inside out for if they hijacked him? That's a lot of trouble, and only done by folks that kill for some other reason and want to make it look like a robbery. He shook his head. You're too anxious to slam it on them. Why should they? That's not the point right now, Collier said. The point is, why do you keep saying I'm too anxious to slam it on them? Spade shrugged. Maybe to clear yourself with Julia as soon as possible, and as clear as possible. Maybe even to clear yourself with the police, and then you've got clients. Collier said, What? Spade made a careless gesture with the cigarette. Ferris, he said blandly. He killed him, of course. Collier's eyelids quivered, though he did not actually blink. Spade said, First, he's the last person we know of who saw Eli alive, and that's always a good bet. Second, he's the only person I talked to before Eli's body turned up who cared whether I thought they were holding out on me or not. The rest of you just thought I was hunting for a guy who'd gone away. He knew I was hunting for a man he had killed, so he had to put himself in the clear. He was even afraid to throw that book away because it had been sent up by the bookstore and could be traced, and there might be clerks who'd seen the inscription. Third, he was the only one who thought Eli was just a sweet, clean, lovable boy, for the same reasons. Fourth, that story about a blackmailer showing up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, making an easy touch for $5,000, and then sticking around until midnight is just silly, no matter how good the booze was. Fifth, the story about the paper Eli signed is still worse, though a forged one could be fixed up easy enough. Sixth, he's got the best reason of anybody we know for wanting Eli dead. Collier nodded slowly. Still nothing, Spade said. Maybe he did the 10,000 out, 5,000 back trick with his bank, but that was easy. Then he got his feeble-minded blackmailer in his house, stalled him along until the servants had gone to bed, took the borrowed gun away from him, shoved him downstairs into his car, took him for a ride, maybe took him already dead, maybe shot him down there by the bushes, frisked him clean to make identification harder and make it look like robbery, tossed the gun in the water, and came home. He broke off to listen to the sound of a siren in the street. He looked then, for the first time since he had begun to talk, at Ferris. Ferris's face was ghastly white, but he held his eyes steady. Spade said, I've got a hunch, Ferris, that we're going to find out about that red lighting job as well. You told me you had your carnival company with a partner for a while when Eli was working for you, and then by yourself. We oughtn't to have a lot of trouble finding out about your partner, whether he disappeared or died a natural death, or is still alive. Ferris had lost some of his erectness. He wet his lips and said, I want to see my lawyer. I don't want to talk till I've seen my lawyer. Spade said, it's all right with me. You're up against it, but I don't like blackmailers myself. I think Eli wrote a good epitaph for them in that book back there. Too many have lived. So that is Dashiell Hammett's Too Many Have Lived, published in 1933. Dashiell Hammett, born in 1894. Interesting. So he was 39 years old then. And curiously enough, that story, reading it aloud, was quite interesting because in the scene changes, you probably noticed it was quite jarring. Going from place to place, all of a sudden you're in a different place. The way they formatted that, and I don't know if it's Mammoth, the company that did this, the way they formatted that, I'll have to check to see if I can find the original online, because you don't even realize you're going into a completely different place. Oh, it's a different section of San Francisco. Oh, it's not his office anymore, right? Did you get that sense? I think reading it now, I want to read it again and then, embellish it myself with better pauses and stuff like that. I think that'll be a big deal. That'll be pretty cool. Yeah. Let me get your thoughts on this. See what you think about the story. And if necessary, I'll do another one on Monday. That might be a little shorter. And let's see. Got Ghost Art in Rumble Land. Skunk Hollow says, badass guard. It was okay. That's one of them. What's very interesting about that Skunk Hollow, you probably noticed the same thing, is, oh, so cool, guard. Thank you, Ashley. That's cool. Yeah. Skunk Hollow, you probably noticed the same thing. A lot of these stories, when you read these detective stories, regardless of the setting or the characters, hard nose versus Victorian London or something like that, a lot of them run the same patterns, which is, for the short stories, you get somebody presented with a conundrum, they meet the characters, they go to different places, get some conflicting information. The reader has to notice maybe there's a conflict, or they'll drop a hint of something, and then later that's used as part of the payoff, like the circus stuff and the red light thing. Now, contextually, at that time, the red light thing might have meant more to people than it does to us because railroads were bigger then. Maybe that was a bigger deal. But a lot of these stories, whether they're Conan Doyle stories, or you got some of the August Derleth stories, or this character Sam Spade in the short stories, it's basically just sleuthing and detecting and figuring stuff out logically, right? And then through conversation, getting this information fed to you by conversation, or maybe a little hint here with a clue here or there, something that they notice. And the best authors are fair with the readers, to tell you, okay, I've introduced something, it's going to pay off later. One of the people who was not necessarily fair with the readers was Agatha Christie. She would often do things in her stories that you could not have known, and then there's the payoff there. It's like, oh, come on, that's not fair. I couldn't figure that. I could have figured that out myself. Interesting to think that a reader at that time would have read a story like that, and you think about how there's not a lot of action there. It's basically just the revelation of a mystery with some characters, hard-nosed characters, and some hints at criminality. And just the criminality and the embezzlement was sufficient. You didn't need somebody getting beheaded or sacrificed or anything like that. But there were other writers around at the time who were starting to explore some of the more grisly things, not full-on grisly, but if you look at some of the descriptive powers of Robert E. Howard in the 30s, especially the 20s, 30s, the way that he describes some of the fighting scenes with Conan or, anything like that, just amazing. Even some of the horror stories of Solomon Kane, right? The Puritan ghost investigator, supernatural investigator from the 1600s. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. I think I'll just do that rather than picking up another story and adding to it. But maybe I'll try to do something more on Monday, something short that might add something to it, because I wasn't too satisfied with some, the transitions from scene to scene. I didn't like the way that those transitions went. I didn't go for that, as Hall & Oates would say. But I did enjoy exploring his rhythm and his descriptions and the way he set up the mystery there. That was interesting. Sometimes it's hard to follow those types of stories with the characters and the timing and what happened. Oh, who's this character? Louis, who's this guy? In fact, I think it's interesting because the story that I'm writing, the science fiction story Fuel, with just the two main characters as they're talking, but they get information, they're talking to each other about other expeditions in space and stuff like that. I think that seems to hold together. The narrative flow on that is better than some of the stories that I've been reading recently. Short stories, even some of the classic short stories, just seems to be a better dynamism to that. Maybe it's just my preference for what I'm writing, but I'm more satisfied with what I've been producing with that. I think it's got a better flow. Yeah. Oh, and it's interesting. Skunk Hollow says that was one hell of an effort. Sheesh, I liked it. I like choppy. I like a choppy read sometimes. That's why I like Catch-22. Yeah, Heller, very interesting. That's a good point, man. Yeah. And Brandon says, thanks, Gard. Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, man. I have an old story that I want to read to you sometime. I have to find it. It's only in physical form. And it's very short. I won't say anything. I have a couple, actually, that I want to read to you, but I have to find them first. I don't have them on any hard drives. They're fairly short. And again, they're these types of stories that I think have pretty good flow. So we'll stand with that. And I'm also thinking maybe reading another Robert Howard, like Sword and Sorcery one, or we were talking about Edgar Allan Poe and that story called Silence, which is quite interesting. And it's got some very interesting religious overtones, I think, to it. Not to prejudice anybody, but I think interesting. And also, if you get a chance and you haven't done so yet, pick up the Screw Tape Letters. I've been rereading the Screw Tape Letters. And I want to talk to Travis about the Screw Tape Letters because he knows his C.S. Lewis very well. That's for sure. Great stuff. G.K. Chesterton. Love his stuff, too. All right, I'm going to hit the road. I'll talk to you soon, everybody. Have a great, great night. I have family members who are off watching 9 Inch Nails right now, so that's cool. And check out some of Dashiell Hammett's stuff, the Continental Op. And I'm going to leave you with...
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the outer limits.